everybody. Welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Picassa. Today, we've got a original South African that has moved to the northeast of New Zealand. His name is Gian Boyseen. And Gian, you've become a specialist with regard to saltwater fishing in New Zealand. So we're going to walk through a subject area of saltwater in New Zealand. In particular, we're going to touch a little bit on a known fact that happens pretty much all over the world, and that's riding rays or following rays. That's a great way to identify fish in especially specific species. But Gian, you've been an angler for 11 years. You've been saltwater fishing for probably 8+ years. I originally found you on Instagram because I was like, wow, this guy has a knack for some things. He's obviously caught some amazing fish and some amazing species. And then you're just in a beautiful location. So you guys are wrapping up your winter right now. We're just getting ready to kick off ours with some nice fall. But we're going to walk through the New Zealand area in and around what the geography is like in that whole ray scenario. But at the end of the show, we're going to cover a tip called follow the beef. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but essentially follow the beef means learn from people who've done it. So Gian, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I'm going to be picking your brain because I live in Utah and I love saltwater. So anything I can learn, I'm wholeheartedly ready to build up. So let's go from there. And
Awesome,
again,
man.
thanks for the show, man. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. Firstly, big privilege, and yeah, always nice to speak to fishy people. So yeah, no, I'm very excited to speak with you, Christian. And yeah, no, all sounds
Get rolling
good.
here. Yeah. So you said you were Italian, but grew up in South Africa. Is that your background?
No. So sorry, full South African, but
Okay.
for some odd reason, my parents chose to give me an Italian name.
And
but no, full-blooded South African. So actually been fishing the majority of my life, but it's only the fly fishing in the last 8 years. But I had the stereotypical hand lining off we call them jetties,
wow.
or you guys I guess call them
piers,
or
pangas
in South Africa.
Jetties, okay,
like a
very
dock,
similar from a
dock,
jetty. Yep.
A dock,
a dock or a jetty. Yeah.
So with my dad, and I had obviously always that ingrained in me, and I guess that just transitioned into the fly fishing.
Yeah, well, jetty fishing's really interesting. Were you fishing a lot of conventional or traditional gear and hand lines?
This is like 6 years old, wrapping line around a Coke bottle. It's not like a bait caster.
Oh, nice.
It's very basic. It's
that's awesome. Well, cool. Good for you, man. That's a great way to learn, especially have some experience with family, etc. So tell me a little bit. Let's do this. We're not all familiar with the geography of New Zealand. If you could just break down a little bit of the geography as it correlates to saltwater fishing, and then we'll start to go from there.
Cool. So I guess most people know where Australia is. Yeah, we're not part of Australia. Let's get that very clear. But to the east, there are, two large islands. We have a North and a South Island. The majority of the saltwater fly angling is on the North Island. There is an exception on the top of the South. I'm talking about flat style saltwater angling. There's an exception on the top of the South, but the majority is on the North Island. You obviously can saltwater fly fish anywhere in the world pretty much, but for the flats, this is where you want to be. On the east of New Zealand, that's where the majority of the proper flats are. Eelgrass dominant, mangrove line, mud flats, that's where you'll find them. On the west, it's more channel dominant, deeper gut systems. So obviously that's where we are. I'm just over midway up on the North Island, so the top island, on the eastern side, in a place called Tauranga. It's also known as, it's in the Bay of Plenty, the sunny Bay of Plenty. So we've got generally quite good weather. Last year was a bit of a funny one, but generally the weather's pretty good. And yeah, where I operate is in a harbor system. I guess you can call it a harbor system. But
harbor system.
The system has two entrances. The bodies of water are largely separate, but they do mix a little bit in the middle. The majority of the system is flats dominant, so yeah, few channels, but generally intertidal. You can walk a large portion of it, and and that's where we're fishing. That's where we're sight fishing to these. I guess we haven't even talked about the fish, so.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because I met with Manny Shukon. He's
Oh
a
yeah,
trout
yeah.
angler. Yeah.
I know
And
him.
Manny,
Yeah,
yeah, you know Manny? He's a good dude. He's
yeah.
really good. He's very sharp.
So the fly shop I mentioned to you that I work at through winter, he buys quite a lot of stuff through
Okay.
us. But I've never fished with him. We've only
Well,
spoken on the.
you should make a point of doing that. He's very sharp. We talked
Mm,
about brown trout in New Zealand, and he
mm-hmm.
described it opposite of what you did from a geolocation of a lot of the sight fishing, targeted fishing for brown trout is more in the south than it is in the north. And you were
Oh,
kind
cool.
of
Okay.
vice versa. So
Mm,
really kind of neat. You can have experiences all over the island. I have a couple
for
quick
sure,
questions for
man.
you
For
just
sure.
to
Yeah.
set up the show, and that is the tidal swing
Mm-hmm.
in New Zealand because of its location. Is the tidal
Mm-hmm.
swing? How much does it swing on average? Is it a few feet, or is it shallower than that,
Oh
etc.?
man, forgive me. I'm going to respond in meters. It's about at the extremes. It's about 2 meters. It's about
2 meters,
at the
so about
extremes
six feet.
2.2.
Yeah,
Yeah,
about
yeah,
six and a half
yeah,
feet. Okay, cool.
yeah.
All right, because I
Where
think
I
that
am,
sets.
where I am.
Yeah. And I just want to kind of set people up for that because a lot of salt anglers don't necessarily take that into place because they're not. They
Mm.
look at dam releases for trout waters, right? Okay, the water's up or
Yeah,
the water's down, but we don't
yeah,
take tidal swing into case, and that can be
yeah.
one dangerous, and two, it could be very operative or opportunistic in the fact
Oh,
that
for
if
sure. We've
a
had
tide's
people.
coming
We've
out, man, you're getting fed.
That's right. Yeah, we've obviously, unfortunately, had instances where people
Get
you
washed.
hear stories of people getting caught out and by the tide, and some of these flats, man, it's like it's 2.5 kilometer walks, and
Yeah.
yeah, they just don't make it.
Yeah. So I guess number one, be careful out there, everyone.
Mm,
Gion's going to give us some insight. So now you have the geography. We know most of the salt waters in the northern part of the island. Let's talk about the handful of species that you like to target and that are available to people. That'd be
absolutely,
great.
man. Oh, cool. Okay, so I think the main thing. Oh, I just got to be careful with my wording here. The species that's captivated the majority of my life is a kingfish, right? Yellowtail kingfish. I think you guys have a similar, if not the same species over in the States. The the way they feed here is a lot different though. So this is knee, waist deep water, and very similar to permit. So they're feeding on crabs, they're feeding on shrimps, they can tail hard, but they ride the rays quite commonly. So you might have
Yep.
a situation where you've got 10 of them together on one ray ready to compete for your fly. The the
And I'm going to stop you
nice thing,
because
yeah, sorry man.
in the States we call it uh, a yellowfin amberjack.
Oh yeah,
Is
well
what
it's the
that's what
same body.
it's the
It,
same body. Yeah,
same
very
body.
similar fish. Yep.
Yeah.
Go
I
ahead.
think
So sorry.
what I love about them is the range of feeding behaviors, right? So we have single, solitary, large cruisers around, 1.30 meter that will travel and maraud, these flats alone, looking for
Mm-hmm.
big mullet schools, and they behave very similar to GTs. I mean, it's same family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have fish completely dialed in on the bottom, tailing frequently. Then you have fish sit on structure, similar to what the amberjacks would over there.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the range of feeding behaviors in this one species presents something really beautiful. That's probably why we're not as species diverse as what some other locations might be, just because of the amount of niches that these guys fill out. But
Right.
yeah,
Right.
anyway, so kingfish, beautiful tail. Yeah, my life.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you said they're ray marauders. I mean, they really follow rays a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
The southern
Is
stingray. Um, yeah,
we
what a
get that
beautiful
too. A
relationship.
permit, um, excuse me, bonefish, etc. Anything that's really feeding on a lot of crustaceans and whatnot, because those rays just come along and start feeding and kicking things off, and then next thing you
Well,
know, those fish are behind them eating on all the trails.
yeah. So okay, we can do this now, and then we can go into the
Yeah,
species
sure,
thing if
go
you'd
for
like.
it.
So the rays belong to a class of animals called the chondrichthyes, right? In this class of animals is also sharks, right? So they're very closely related. Now, what's special about this class of animals is around their mouth, they have sensory structures called the ampullae of Lorenzini. These are small pores filled with a conductive gel. So
Hmm.
anything that breathes, any heart that pulses, it all puts out a minute voltage. And these guys pick
Hmm.
up on that. So the rays can be traveling these large flats from, hundreds of meters away. Will pick up
Yeah.
these small voltages, dying prey, fleeing crabs, and scurry over to them. The item will then be disturbed, whether it's a crab, a flounder, whatever. If it is disturbed and flees from the ray, that's when your permit, your bonefish, your kingfish, they'll nab it up and take it away.
Hmm. Okay.
If not, the ray obviously
Yeah, wins the
feeds on
battle.
it itself. This is why, like here, we have sharks. They're called bronze whalers, but you also around the world you'll see these teleos is the group of fish, but you'll see the fish travel alongside sharks as well. It's the
Hmm.
same principle with the same receptors around the mouth. Yeah, so that's
So
something
that's
cool. Well, at
really
least I think
interesting.
it's cool. So
Yeah, very cool. And by the way, Gian, I don't think we mentioned, but you have a history in biology. Um,
yeah, so studies of marine biologist. I mean, I've been obsessed with the ocean since a
yeah.
little guy. My parents would take me around South Africa so we could see all the speaking marine biologists, and I could pester them with questions. And yeah, no, I'm very fortunate to have such a passion. So
Yeah, yeah, it's
yeah.
good. It's good. It's so applicable for you right now. Let me ask you
Mm.
this: have there been studies done on rays and sharks on the voltage required? Because I would assume they're measuring it in hertz.
They have, and there's a really cool. I don't know if it's through TED or what the company is. There's a really cool video on YouTube where I think they show you the exact volt. So they set up the tanks and they put these little discs in, and they show you the exact voltages that they're putting out, and you can see how quickly the rays just race over to make contact with the voltage.
Oh wow,
So,
very cool.
so because one thing we often joke about is if you can put these voltages in
In the fly,
in
right?
in the flies, because with the coastal anglers in South Africa that target those big sharks, I mean, it's not obviously my love, but imagine if you could imitate very
Oh yeah,
closely the voltage of the prey item in your offering to the. I mean, you'd be on fire, man.
you'd be on fire. Yeah, I mean, I've seen it with barracuda and I've seen it with sharks where you'll cast a fly, you'll cast a fly, you'll cast a fly. They don't want anything to do with it. Change your fly, you cast
Yeah.
it. They don't want anything to do with it. And then someone goes, "Can I just chuck a piece of bait at it?" And
Mm.
they throw on a live piece of mullet or something or a chunk of a needlefish and they toss it out there. And it's like that
Yeah.
shark will be 40 feet away and do a 180 turn and just
Yeah.
slam it.
It
It's
shows you
there's
how sensitive
something
they
to
are.
do with that voltage rate in a flattering or fluttering fish that
Yeah.
makes the
Well,
difference.
it
It's like a
it
trigger
represents
response.
life. It
Yeah.
represents life and a safe to eat food item. Because
Mm,
you, if the food item is dead, obviously there is hesitation as to okay, something. Why is this full nice fish lying here? Something has
right.
obviously
Is it
killed it, and
diseased? It's like a self
for sure,
preservation.
for
Yeah.
sure, for sure.
Okay.
I had an interesting scenario. We have sometimes these big sharks come onto the flats here, very rarely, and I could present a nice beast fly to it, and obviously the thing comes up, mouth open, and this is the closest I've ever gotten, and it just turns away. and it's like its mouth was completely never closed, but completely around it. And so you wonder
Wow.
if it just knew.
Yeah. Something's not right
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Well, very cool scenario. And I love the idea that there's, more and more science behind what you're seeing on rays. Because I go
Mm.
to the flats and you see that all the time. I mean, if a
Yeah,
guide or yourself, if you see a ray or somebody in the boat, it's like all eyes are on the water, all eyes are scoping behind it.
yeah.
Where are the fish at? Because in
Mm.
all likelihood, if
And
that ray is
and
feeding, there are fish
what
around.
we they might not be on it. What
Mm-hmm.
the path they travel. So we'll follow the rays,
Mm-hmm.
and you might spend, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes following this thing, and only then a fish jumps on it, and then another, and then five others, and then they leave again. So you might initially make the assumption that there's no one home or no one present on the ray,
Mm-hmm.
and then shortly after, someone joins, or the fish is sitting, 10, 15 meters off the ray, if it's a slow moving ray,
Mm-hmm.
swimming around your feet, and you might not even be aware there's a fish there.
Right. Right. And I've seen scenarios where you have a ray and the ray's traveling from food location to food location. So
Mm,
in between, it's not feeding. So the fish aren't on it. Right.
mm.
But then it gets
Well,
to a location
yeah,
and it starts to mud a little bit or it's on some
yeah,
food. And then all of a sudden, like you said, the fish, they just come out of nowhere. It's like, okay, that ray's
yeah,
feeding. Now there's leftovers. I'm going to go take
yeah,
advantage.
for
Yeah.
sure. And you can see obviously when they're traveling, and you can see when
Yeah.
they're scouring and when they're looking
Hmm. Yeah.
looking for
All
food.
right. So
Yeah.
that was a great little rabbit hole for us to dive in. We did a great job of describing that. Let's get back to the species. So you were
Yeah.
talking about
Sorry. So
kingfish. How
kingfish.
about a
Yep.
few other species? Yeah.
Yeah. So we have um another species called kahawai. I don't. It's like pretty much like a smaller version, but this thing is bullet shaped. It can also grow somewhat large, 60, 70 centimeters, but really explosive eats, aerial jumps, and it's a strong fish. It's a very
Mm.
strong fish. The majority of trout anglers that come out, and if they hook one, regardless of the size, they're always blown away by the strength of it.
Mm.
And I always joke that if it got the size of GTs or of kingfish, we would be in trouble.
It'd be over. Right.
Yeah, so they have incredible colorations, and these colorations change through their life. Amazing species.
Okay.
Also on the flats, also tailing. Yeah.
So
And
those
then
two
we have,
species,
yep.
those two species, can you describe some of the ways that you maybe feed them a little different or target them first, and then how do you feed them, cast them, feed them?
Okay. Well, look, put it like this: the kahawai can be, not always, a lot more forgiving than the kingfish.
Mm.
Uh, you can generally get away with a lot more in your presentation,
Okay.
than what you can with the kingfish. Um, the permit anglers I take out are often quite surprised by how similar the pursuit for a kingfish is
Mm.
to their permit experience. It is much more challenging than most expect. Um, and they're not as numerous. They're top of the food chain pretty much,
Yeah.
bar
Okay.
a few, but they're top of the food chain. And the kahawai are much more prevalent, much higher concentration, much easier to stumble across. The kings, it's the shot count is much lower, and you have to be quite careful with the approach. Um, each scenario is different. We try gauge the feeding behavior. So if it is a tailing fish, we'll approach it that way. If
Mm-hmm.
we call them free swimmers, meaning just swimming without rays, cruising, then they're normally larger, and they're the ones eating bait fish like mullet or juvenile kahawai. Then we'll
Mm-hmm.
approach it that way, whether it's with hollow flies, beast flies, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we try go that route. With the kahawai, you might find them schooling in the channels or just on little anchovies, and yeah, yeah.
Interesting. And I would assume the feeding behaviors are similar to, what like a permit would be, if they're singles, or if they're in a group schooling, it might be more like bonefish
You
kind
are
of thing, or tailing
spot on.
redfish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
So
So
obviously
it's
you've got the competition aspect, the more fish that are
right. Right.
present. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And when they're singles, it's always difficult to approach a single, right? Because they seem to be just a little bit more weary and very
Mm,
confident fish, right?
mm.
Are you do they change direction like a permit?
Oh man, that's one of the telltale signs. Like for us, these kings zigzag so much. So if you're
Okay.
seeing the wake zigzagging back and forth, and it's a distinct sharp wake. If you see it zigzagging back and forth, you can be fairly sure uh,
Okay.
this is a king. Yeah,
Is it a little more difficult to predict, or put an estimate on, hey, I think this is where they're going to be, so I'm going to try and lead them and get my fly in place?
it
Or are
is. It
you
is.
trying to be really targeted, like, I got to be within a garbage can lid of this thing, or I'm just not going to get it?
Again, it depends on the presentation. So
Okay.
if we're casting a little popper at the thing, man, it can be what 4 or 5 meters away, and the audible impact will be so loud that the thing just races over to it.
Yeah.
But if you're fishing something with a very small presence, entering the water very lightly, you might have to be 2 meters,
A little more targeted.
away
Yeah.
from it. Yeah, the direction change is difficult, especially when I have fresh anglers or people that don't have saltwater experience come on over, because the direction change is very quick, and these fish
Mm-hmm.
cruising are very fast. So you don't
Yeah.
have all the time in the world to change angles, to
Mm-hmm.
readjust line. So the more proficient, obviously, that's one tip I can say is the more proficient you are as a caster, and the more in control you are of your line management, uh, you will definitely enjoy the experience a whole
Yeah.
lot more. It doesn't matter where in the world you are, you'll enjoy it a whole lot
Yeah. Well, our goal as fly fishing insiders, from a proficiency standpoint, we preach it all the time, is you
more.
need to be able to make 2 false casts and land your fly.
Ah,
Releasing
yeah,
line in
okay,
your back cast and then landing your fly. That's one of our
yeah,
major objectives to be successful in any water. So
yeah,
I love to hear that. It's such a supportive piece of, I would say,
heck yeah.
personal education and skill set to be
Well, for
available for
sure. I
all
mean,
species. Yeah.
3 seconds and it's done, right?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
shot's done. So it's up to you, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
here's
can move the boat as perfect as you want, but these guys move quick. So,
that's right. Right. Um, you mentioned fishing with poppers and things like
hmm
that. Stick, um, something that makes a lot of water. Is that a normal approach for kingfish, or do you have to see them eating more on the top in order to do that? I mean, I know a lot of guys who fish conventional, they'll fish stick bait or poppers, and they're like, "That's
mm,
all I fish," because it just creates a lot of commotion.
yeah,
But like if we fish for redfish or something, it's pretty much,
mm,
unless I've seen a lot of floating redfish, I'm fishing a some underneath kind of streamer bait scenario.
hmm. Look, it's not always our go-to approach, but it can be quite a fun way for people to fish.
Oh yeah.
Um, it's not always, like you alluded to, the most effective way of doing things, but for prospecting and for, I guess, I don't want to say aggravating, but for really perking up the interest of a fish,
Mm,
that audible impact and the bubble trail does seem to provoke something.
yeah.
Um, it's obviously always also the rising to the surface and looking like it's fleeing the water column. That's a big element to it, and I think a larger trigger than what most give it credit for. But I think the fish, at least here, a little bit, they're more educated now. They understand a little bit. So it's if we're in like a high number zone, and we're getting a lot of shots, and the person says, "Okay, yeah," and
Let's
we
put the
agree.
popper on.
Let's put a little, and let's put a little popper on, and yeah. But you say that, and you might come across one fish that just obliterates it,
Right.
and
And
it's got.
sometimes that one fish is worth 10 from a
Oh,
topwater.
for sure.
It's
Well,
just like amazing.
these larger fish that tend to come off the poppers as well. So
Yeah. Okay.
they tend,
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. So we covered two species, two approaches. Let's get to the
yeah.
next
Okay, well,
species.
okay. So the next one, it's probably captivated the uh my recent years, and it's we call him a snapper, New Zealand snapper, but
Okay.
it's not really similar to what you guys have. This really is like a permit, right? It's in and amongst the mangroves, it's tailing hard, but its appeal is it's incredibly flighty, unbelievably flighty,
Hmm.
right? I have permit anglers come and say they've never experienced a fish like this,
Hmm.
right? It's only a select portion of our year that we target these guys in this specific way, and they are just beautiful. They're beautiful, beautiful fish feeding on crabs. And the precision in casting and approach, everything has to be very dialed in for them. Yeah,
Are they in the?
they are not a forgiving species. Put it like that, man.
Yeah.
You do even a percentage of the wrong movement, and they're out of there.
Yeah. Are they like a snook or a tarpon where they sit on the edge of the mangroves, or do they really cruise up into the mangroves and feed?
They will cruise in and all the way to the back. They will, near the top of the tides, but they will also sit. The odd one will sit stationary for short bouts on the edges. They cruise very slowly. Sometimes I know
Mm-hmm.
always exceptions, but they generally cruise very slowly. Also, big eyes, mouths made for crushing. Uh, you
Okay.
know, they really made for crushing. Um, yeah,
I'm not familiar with this species. Are they more of a shape of like a jack or permit, or are they more of like a deep water kind of snapper that you had described, where they sit on shelf and whatnot?
yeah, probably a blend of that with the pyramid. So it's a deep
Yeah.
body,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
it's the dorsal
A little
is spiky,
shallower.
but
Yeah.
the
Spiky.
tail is big. Um, it's a thick tail. Um,
Huh.
but yeah, and similar, you'll find members of them just chasing bait fish,
Yeah.
which is rare, but generally it's more the crustacean front.
Okay. When you when you're targeting that fish, you said there's a particular time of year, so
Mm.
that's when they're typically in place. Are you cruising the mangroves along the flats looking for them, or looking deep
Mm.
into the mangroves and trying to
Mm.
draw them out? What are the tactics that you're using to gather their attention and get it eat?
Mm. Cool. So I will try speak freely here, but I'm these guys are so close to my heart. I'm not going to give too much
Yeah,
away.
all the secrets.
Um, but yeah, we're just cruising very slowly, looking for them. You need to be very comfortable with the person on the bow. Like you guys are obviously a collective team, and you need to have some synchronicity and understanding between one another of what's going on. Because I mean, yeah, you speak too loudly, you move your feet, it goes wrong. So
Gone. Yeah.
you need to understand what's going on, both of you. We cruise slowly, and you yeah, and approach them that way. They differ in color. There's quite a range, but so the majority of the fish is red, but their pick fins almost are, and bottom of the tail fin, bright blue, can be bright blue.
Mm.
So often, and they're dotted with bright blue dots. So you might, the red can be a very faded light red, so it's not always the easiest to see on a flat. But you might spot the blue. You might spot the blue first,
Okay.
and then know, and then we just try to pick the direction it's facing, and we'll approach it like that.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, similar, I guess. With like very lightly weighted merkin.
Okay. Yeah. So you're
Just
throwing like
just,
a fly, you're wanting to get it to their eating level and then just
but very
slow,
slowly,
small ticks. Yeah.
very slowly, and very small presence as it enters the water.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So I very much like a permit on an eat
Oh yeah.
scenario. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Sounds
Yeah.
delicious.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah, it'd
man,
be
it's. I
fun.
mean, it just recently, I've I haven't been. I've been pursuing them, but without a rod in hand. So I've gotten into
Mm.
taking these tailing photos, and my partner and I we go on these adventures where we're stalking and walking with these fish, just trying to capture that one moment that the tail peeks through, or that they're feeding, that they're doing their their headstand digging down, and man, and you grow such a, it deepens your love so much for the species,
Oh yeah.
spending that time with them in the water and observing them, because you're
Yep.
not rushed to make a cast or anything, because that's not even an option. You're just
No,
watching
you
them
actually
with the
slow
fish.
down a lot because you're
For
trying to
sure, and you see
you're
so much.
micro you're trying to get that microcosm of instances there. Right? Yeah,
Yeah,
really cool.
yeah,
It's a great
yeah,
activity for any type of fishing. Just, oh, I'm not feeling too good today to fish. I hurt my arm or I did this. Well, just go for a
yeah.
hike and observe. Try and find them,
Man,
see them,
absolutely,
and you'll
absolutely.
start seeing fish all over the place. It's really wild.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm.
very cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump in to the next guy.
Okay. I guess the last one that we'll probably touch on is a silver trevally. So trevally family,
Hmm.
very muscular fish, deep bodied, amazing colorations. We also find them traveling on the race, but quite rarely, and generally on channel edges is where we'll find them.
And is that because they're following the bait fish on the edges primarily?
They do predate on bait fish, especially the larger models, the larger guys, the older guys.
Uh-huh.
Um, Generally, it's a little bit smaller prey items. They don't have the size mouth that you normally associate with a trevally. And
Hmm.
instead, it's a very soft-lipped, small mouth. I don't know if you guys are familiar with golden trevallies in Australia, but
Yeah.
very similar mouth structure to that. I've never caught a golden trevally, but just from what I've seen in photos and heard from friends and clients. But its appeal, obviously, because it's such a powerful fish, and the ones here, they have incredibly soft mouths. So you have to be really careful as an angler when playing these fish, because it's quite easy to overdo it and to
Oh,
pop the hook off.
okay.
So that takes a little bit of a skill. They're incredibly muscular. They're probably one of the hardest finding fish we've got.
Huh.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to do this. I'm going to share my screen because I want you to. Well, we're going to try to. Maybe I won't do it today. Well, I was going to try and share my screen, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
allowing me to. So, um, anyway, it is a cool looking fish. It looks like a trevally, but like you said, instead of having
Mm,
that blunt face and nose, it's got a
yeah,
smaller kind of pointed lip.
yeah.
Really, it's almost got like a tuna lip.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it looks really cool. But a super strong fish, you said?
Yeah, very strong, very strong. Um, yeah, no, they'll, yeah. It's generally one very strong, powerful run deep into your backing, probably quite similar to a bonefish style.
Okay. Yep.
Like a high speed, not like mass power, but high
Really
speed,
fast. Yeah.
and it's off. Even under high tension. Um, and then yeah, it's quite a it's quite an experience. It's quite a balance of pressure,
Yeah.
especially with these guys. So it teaches the anglers a lot.
Are there landing obstacles for a lot of these species?
Yes,
So maybe talk
kind of.
about those. Like, hey, I hooked this one. For this fish, you want to really be careful of this. For this fish, watch for this to happen. Maybe put,
Yeah.
more pressure to keep it
So
out of the
if
mangroves or whatever.
okay. So with the kings, we've got obviously they're you got the flats, and then on the edges you might have marker pylons, right? And they're
Mm-hmm.
insanely dirty fighters. They will run directly straight at the pylon, like they know where it is.
They're trying to wrap you.
If you're on a Yeah, for sure. If you're on a large expansive flat, um, they will generally use the boat on you, right? So you're running circles around the boat,
Okay.
while the fish is trying to rub you off on it. The snappers will run you back into the mangroves. So that's just an awesome scenario. So
Yeah.
I'd have to jump out, weave your way through the mangroves, get them out, and proceed like that, or you have to from the get go,
Yes. Keep them out of
somehow
there.
manage to pull them and keep them out of there. The trevallies also will be around marker pylons, so
Okay.
you got to be careful. The big marker pylons, I think, like I mentioned to you before, that hold the kings. If you're fishing to the pylon and you hook them, you've got to be really cautious. Often I have to be on point as the boat driver and make sure everything,
Right.
you know, goes well there. Uh, we don't find the carwise on the pylons. The carwise are normally on the flats or in the channels. They can be close to markers, but we haven't really had any terrible scenarios there.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you see a fair amount on the flats of hooked fish being hit by predaceous fish like sharks or
No,
kudos or
no,
things like that?
no.
It's uncommon.
I've had, um, I can count on the hand the amount of scenarios I've had on marker pylons
Mm-hmm.
where a fish has been hooked, and you'll have a shark. We have bronze whalers come and look. I've never had. Obviously, I can't see what happens after the release, but during the fight, we've never had any mortality so far with the shark. Cross
Yeah.
fingers. On the flats, no, it's not. It's not. Like with the black tips, or we.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite rare. It's quite rare for us to see sharks on the flats themselves.
Oh, okay. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Well,
Mm,
you covered a lot of species, man. That's just fantastic. You talked about how to feed them,
mm,
etc. Casting techniques. If you were to come there, say on a vacation, and you're
mm.
like, man, I can only bring one rod. What kind of rod would you bring? Would you bring a 9 weight or a 10 weight or
Man,
heavier, less?
I say bring what you love.
Yeah.
Honestly, we've like some of these snappers we're targeting with 6-weight glass rods, right?
Okay.
Just for the delicacy and the accuracy that you get.
Okay.
Some of the kings you can go all the way to a 12 on the marker pylons. The most common, an 8-weight that you're really comfortable with, you can
Okay.
get away with most situations. You might struggle a bit on the structure, like the marker pylons, but for the flats, a nice 8 that you like is probably as good as it gets. 9, 10, a little bit nicer to punch through the wind. So yeah, I mean
Yeah.
it's
Fish to your
completely up to
comfort
you.
level. Yeah. There's enough
Yeah,
to go
we
around.
we provide all the gear, so I'm pretty methodical, and I'll make sure that whatever the day throws at you, we've got the right thing for it. Whether that be suggesting a different line to you or suggesting you try a different rod,
Mm-hmm.
and we go that way.
You had mentioned, hey, some of these fish, Christian, are pretty they're picky, right? Or
Mm,
they're weary.
mm.
If I'm a beginner salt angler, what's maybe one or two things I could do to really help myself in that scenario? Is distance really important, or is it more accuracy? Is it more
Uh,
gentleness of cast?
Look, This is one of those funny questions, right? There's no one answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Distance helps. Distance helps. The line speed more often that corresponds with distance, I would argue, is more important, right?
Hmm.
Delicacy in presentation, absolutely. Absolutely. Understanding the amount of power you've put into a cast and just knowing how that lead is going to turn over. So you don't smash the fly down, but lightly ease it down,
Hmm.
I think can be quite important. Remember, each situation is different. It might
It's
be
different.
completely glassed out. You might have a little bit of a breeze and a riffle, or there might be actual caps on the water. And,
Right.
and then obviously you get away with a lot more. You've got
Yeah.
a lot more leeway.
You got a lot more
Um,
leeway in your land, but you got a lot less leeway in getting your line out,
for
right? If
sure.
there's
Well,
caps.
it
Yeah. So
depends
it's, yeah.
obviously on the
Yeah.
boat orientation. If we've set you up to work with the wind or work against the wind, and yeah. So there's all these. It's a beautiful balance because there's all
Yeah.
these positive and negatives that you're juggling. You're juggling in that scenario. But yeah, to a haul is important. Line speed is important. Understanding power, what's too much, what's too little.
Hmm.
The most beautiful casters I've had on the boat understand that balance incredibly well. They are not distance casters, but it doesn't matter where you say the target is, they will put it on a dime. They will
Hmm.
not force a cast. They will not, a cast will not collapse. They understand their pressure in the casting stroke so well that, just the right amount to get the fly just to turn over and sit.
Hmm.
And that I think is a huge asset. But
Yeah.
you might have a fish that's just so charged up it will just eat anything, and then you get
Yeah.
away with quite a bit. But
Yeah.
I'm talking about that cohort of fish where it matters. Uh,
Right. In
yeah.
that moment for the angler where they feel like they put it all together, right?
Mm,
I've practiced this. I've tried this. I've worked on
mm,
this. And
mm,
all of a sudden, I didn't have to think about it, but it happened. And after it happened, I
mm.
know I didn't have to think about it because I've
Yeah,
learned it inside and out.
dude, that's Christian. That's a beautiful point. If sorry, and I should have actually mentioned that, but when you get to the point where there's no thought needed, the no thought needed and the behavior just happens, right?
Hmm.
The angler has such an understanding of all the forces around them, the fish direction, obviously what they're fishing with in terms of gear. They don't think about the amount of false casts. Like, as a beginning angler, you think, okay, yeah, now it's far enough. Now I put it down.
Yeah.
Now. No, there's nothing like that. It's second nature. See a target, see the eyes, and they know exactly where to put the fly, and
Yeah.
it's done. It's
Yep.
done. There's no other thought.
Yeah. It's a
It's
beautiful
all
thing.
about the intimacy with you and the fish species, right?
Yeah.
That's where their thought is.
Yeah.
The cat and mouse game. It's
Yeah.
not about the cast.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool. And what's really unique for a lot of us here in the States that don't do a ton of saltwater fishing is we have that feeling quite often as a trout angler.
Mm, mm.
Um,
Yeah,
but
for
it's
sure.
making that transition for a lot of people. And I think it's vice versa
Yeah.
too, right? Some saltwater
Oh
anglers
yeah.
struggle with the other side, especially with dry flies and things like that. But
Oh yeah.
very, very
Absolutely.
neat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
Well,
mean,
let's do
you can
this.
imagine. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Can you imagine?
No, I was going to say you can imagine, fishing solely with a 10 the majority of your life, and
Yeah. Yeah.
dropping down to a 4, and now all of a sudden you got to readjust the whole balancing game with force
Right.
and
And then you
live
have to read
live stuff.
currents. You have to read
Yeah, and
currents.
then you
Oh,
have
am
to
I
read
cross current?
currents, and
Am I this? Am I
it's
that?
not all about distance. It's not all about punching into the wind. It's you got
Right.
all these
Right.
other factors now.
Yeah.
But that's what you and I were speaking about earlier. Like taking part in all these different disciplines is the best thing you can do as an angler
Yep.
because you're going to be able to carry things over from Euro nymphing, from dry fly fishing
Hmm.
to flats fishing for GTs. There are, how would you say, transferable methods that you can take from all these domains
Yep.
to make to better yourself as an angler. Ultimately,
Yeah. Yeah. We
yeah,
call that on the show building your repertoire of moves for fishing.
perfect.
So I have a repertoire of moves that I'm gonna bank, and they're
Yeah,
memorized in their
perfect.
habits, right? And so I
Yeah,
know, oh, I need the green shirt today. I need the
yeah,
the blue pants. Oh, I really need red pants right now. Boom.
yeah.
But if they're
That's
there
it,
and
man.
they're ready and they're practiced and memorized and functionally
Mm,
there, you can
mm,
just withdraw them and not think about it. But if you
mm.
really have
For
to think
sure,
about it, you're still in that learning phase. So
for
really
sure.
cool. Well, we're getting close on time, and I don't want to skip it because you have a tip called "Follow the Beef," and I love the scenario of "Follow the Beef," and
Yeah.
I'm really interested to
Uh,
hear your approach to that and why.
okay. Well, look, I obviously can't take credit for this. A friend of mine, uh, Chris, is he probably advocates for it much more strongly than what I do, but I really like it. So the premise being that generally you don't take advice from the guy that rides his bike to the car dealership to sell you a car. You follow the beef. So uh, if you're going, if you've got a GT trip coming up, you take advice from a GT fisherman.
Mm-hmm.
Not from a trout angler up in the hills. Obviously, I'm not dogging the trout angler, but
Right.
we all have our domains, and the time on the water that the GT angler would have spent in his domain is unmatched. So that's where you take advice from.
Mm-hmm.
This is transferable to fly tying with certain principles. You take it from the people that actually do it. If you Dave Skoke or Nathaniel Linville, or you take, if you like permit, that's where you go,
Right.
right? Vice versa, like you alluded to Golden Dorado, or whether it's the trout in the hills. Like everyone has their specialty. Um, yeah,
It
so
could
I
be
mean that
regionally too, right?
oh, for
I mean,
sure.
it's a big change.
Even being same species but different regions,
Yeah.
it would be wise to approach people in those regions and just speak to them about things. Um, yeah, yeah.
Is
That's
there a
what.
particular way that you like to approach that conversation? I mean, for me, when I think of speaking to someone about their intimate knowledge of something, I
Yeah,
really go start to end and I go, okay, when you're packing for the trip, what are you packing? Why?
yeah.
Why is that important? What is that important for? And then the next is, okay, you got there. What time of day are we
Mm,
going? Where are we
mm,
going? What are we looking for? All right, now that we found one, I just go down the list all the way to where, all right, I hooked the guy and I'm bringing him in. What I just asked it to you. What am I watching out for? Are there pylons? Are there
yeah,
trap
for sure.
sticks up along the beach, mangroves, whatever? So.
Mm. Yeah, that would be the way to approach it. I think I I look at things um, through a probability mindset. I'm quite big into working out picking the optimal regret, right? So
Mm,
understanding this being understanding your knots, understanding the breaking strains of each different knot, right? Knowing when to use what in terms of your knots, your leader setup, speaking with the guides, what do you have confidence in, all clear fly lines or colored fly lines, or thinking about these things in such detail, thinking how the hook's going to roll in the mouth, the
mm-hmm,
shape of the point, the curve in the bend, right, the length of the shank, right, and you can really, if you really want to, which you can work these things out, and it's an
mm-hmm.
incredible advantage. You'll be shocked when, in winter here in the fly shop, so many people come to you and they say, "Oh, my line is breaking. Oh, I can't understand." But they don't even know what knot they're tying onto the fly. And
Mm,
considering you can jump from, 50 to late 90 percentile retention strength in knots, it's incredible to think that people don't even understand the knots that they're tying with.
mm.
It makes, and because all of, 4 pound tippet is not then 4 pound tippet. 4 pound
No,
tippet
yeah,
becomes, 1.9 pound tippet
Right.
just because of a shit tied. Oh,
Right.
sorry, I don't know if I can swear,
Yeah.
but
No,
just
it's
because of a
fine.
poorly tied knot, right?
But
So
you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely
having
right.
that
Yeah.
understanding, not being afraid to test these things yourself, not being afraid to test the knots. I have an Excel document for every single knot, because I love testing them.
Yeah.
Because it really impacts. I mean, it impacts the sink rate of the fly. All these lines stretch differently, so you can really dial in and calculate a scenario.
Yeah.
That makes it fun for me. I guess for some people it might take some of the fun away and some of the
Yeah.
spontaneity, but I think, yeah, at least having some understanding of that is important.
hmm You
Mm,
you made a really great point, and we had a guy on the show. He was a trout angler, Brian Hilbert. He's a guide. He's very
mm,
sharp.
mm,
And I asked him a similar question. He said, as a guide or as an angler, I focus on the things I know I can control. I can
mm,
control the strength of a knot because it's a known entity. I can
mm,
control the stiffness of a line or a rod,
mm.
etc. I can control my casting styles. What I
Yeah,
can't control is whether or not the fish is going to eat,
yeah,
whether or not the fish is going to turn, whether or not the wind is going to be good or bad that day. But if I focus on the things
yeah,
that I can control and self manage, then my
yeah,
propensity to win in the long run goes up. So I just love
yeah.
that. And then the last
I
was, I loved what
yeah.
you said too. Is another trout angler. He's really famous in the U.S. He's a U.S. competitor. His name's Lance Egan, and he gave me a solid piece of advice. And that was one day he said, people walk into my fly shop all the time and they say, "Hey, what bug should I buy?" And he's like, "Man, that should be the last question you ask. You should be
Mm,
asking, hey, where are the fish sitting? Are they
mm,
on the flats? Are they on the
mm.
edge? Are they in the pool? Are they in the head of the water, the tail of the water, etc.?" He's like, once you know where the
Yeah,
fish are, he's like, all your general tactics come into play.
absolutely, absolutely. No, good point. Well, just to be a nuisance here and play devil's advocate a little bit with Brian's way of thinking. That that perceived level of control is subjective to every angler as well, and it shouldn't be
Mm,
seen as a fixed entity, right? It's always changeable, right? And you can tailor that level of control to and move it to extremes, right?
yes.
So you hear some of these amazing stories of Japanese anglers in the small streams with every scenario picking the point in the mouth where they're going to set the hook. And you look at the control, and they generally to a highly statistical significant point get this correct. And
Mm,
it's because they practice it. They have such a level of control with what they're doing and understanding with what they're doing that they can make these calls. And they say, oh, yeah, and the scissors on the right hand side, I'm going to get it on the inside. Bang, done. And vice versa. They'll practice this. Okay, so say,
yeah.
okay, this one, I want to try top of the mouth, um, just slightly veer it to the left. And you think, wow, how do they do this? But it's
Yeah.
just understanding, and they've shifted that level of control to what we perceive as the extreme. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Very cool.
things can change.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
practice. How much do you want to be involved in? Like you said, uh, sometimes that takes away from something for someone because they just want to
Mm.
relax. Sometimes that leads them
Man,
towards it.
that's
Right.
that's probably I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, the current philosophical either stump or progression in my life is how much detail should one pick to look at things in, because
Mm-hmm.
really the level of detail it's infinite. you can
Yep.
you can pick how deeply you want to go into these things, but you don't want to rob the scenario of its beauty, of its natural beauty at the same time. So having that balance of a detailed approach, but understanding the worth of a scenario, not missing the birds, not missing the baitfish fleeing, not missing the sunshine on your skin, not
Mm-hmm.
missing the company of the guide or your friend with you
Right.
on the boat or your spouse with you on the boat, not missing the little breakfast, the coffee, everything. Not
That's
being
it.
you're being right in the Goldilocks zone. right in the sweet
Yeah.
spot of understanding the detail, but not missing the special experience.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Realizing the difference between a job and a vacation. Right.
Absolutely.
Well, Gian, it's been great connecting with you. I'm so glad I reached out over Instagram. You've taught me a
Thank
ton
you, Christian.
today, but you've also taught me a ton online, just seeing your pictures and watching you. I'm looking
Oh,
forward
thank you, Christian.
to following you some more. How do we best get a hold of you on Instagram? What's your Instagram handle?
So Instagram is just Kings to be found. Website is the same. Email is the same. So
Same. Okay. Kings
yeah,
to be found. That'll
yeah.
all be in the show notes for us. We'll get you guys connected. Again, man, it was really good having you on the show. You're obviously a wealth of knowledge on the saltwater fishing out there, and I know I'm planning a trip to the island, and
I just enjoy
I'm
it.
hoping to do a north and south vacation. I just don't know if I'm going to have enough time.
Yeah. Come on over.
I'm going to
man.
try and make it happen.
Come on
Though.
over.
Make it happen.
Come on over. It would be great. It would be a real privilege to meet you in person and to speak and just to hang out. Thank you for this amazing podcast and for the opportunity. I'm grateful for that, and thanks for reaching out.
As well.
This has been awesome. So.
Our time we don't get back, and this was well worth it, my friend. You made it extremely valuable. We'll talk to you guys next week. We'll be back with another guest, someone to help us learn how to catch any fish, any species, anywhere on the Fly Fishing Insider podcast. We'll talk to you soon.